Sometimes I think the same of you. Sometimes I think the same of you. Sometimes I think the same of you. A seed of love, a seed of sight, of songs to sing, of words to write, a seed of good, a seed of light, of noble deeds, of wrongs to right. Oh, sometimes I think and wonder. Sometimes I think that there might be some finer thing in you and me. Sometimes I think and wonder.
This morning, we're going to do something we haven't done yet in online worship, and that's a responsive reading. Now, ordinarily, if we were gathering in the sanctuary, I would read the parts in regular print and invite you to respond by reading the parts in italics. But since people don't have hymnals at home, we won't be able to do that. So instead, what I'm going to ask you to do this morning is to respond along with me to the words that Mary reads. And the words that we're reading together will be printed at the bottom of the screen. This morning, we're reading On Turning, and it's number 634 in our gray hymnal, Singing Living Tradition. It was written for Rosh Hashanah by Jack Reamer, who was the founder of the National Rabbinic Council.
Now is the time for turning.
The leaves are beginning to turn from green to red and orange.
The birds are beginning to turn and are heading once more toward the south.
The animals are beginning to turn to storing their food for the winter.
For leaves, birds, and animals, turning comes instinctively.
But for us, turning does not come so easily.
It takes an act of will for us to make a turn. It means breaking with old habits.
It means admitting that we have been wrong, and this is never easy.
It means losing face. It means starting all over again, and this is always painful.
It means saying, I am sorry.
It means recognizing that we have the ability to change. But these things are hard to do.
But unless we turn, we will be trapped forever in yesterday's ways.
God, help us to turn from callousness to sensitivity, from hostility to love, from pettiness to purpose, from envy to contentment, from carelessness to discipline, from fear to faith.
Turn us around, O God, and bring us back to you.
Revive our lives as at the beginning.
And turn us toward each other, for in isolation there is no life.
I was looking into the issue of banned books because every September there is a recognition of banned books in America, and there's some discussion and attention directed to the issue of that kind of censorship. It turns out, according to PEN America, the most extensive book banning occurs in prisons. There are more than 2.2 million individuals who are affected by banned books, and the people in prison are given little or no access to good literature, or even bad literature for that matter. because the materials that they're given in prisons are so limited. So the PEN America people are trying to draw some attention to this problem in the prisons by setting forth a literature locked up campaign. They looked at some of the books that have been banned, and they looked at some of the reasons for banning them. And I think it's an interesting conundrum, really, as to whether or not some of these are appropriately banned, or whether we should be much more open in exposing even prisoners to new ideas. There's a lot of fear, I think, involved in the issue of banning books. And so when you're looking at a list like this, it's interesting to see what the reasons given are for banning that particular book. One of the books banned was The New Jim Crow, and it was banned because it was likely to provoke a confrontation between racial groups. Now, I don't know if it really would. I haven't read that particular book, but that's an interesting concept. The problem is, who decides whether or not it's likely to provoke that kind of reaction? I don't know how they go about doing that, but it's an interesting thing to look at. What are they afraid of? What ideas are people afraid of that results in banning books? Here's another one that they banned in the prisons. It was Paradise by Toni Morrison. And the reason given for that banning was that a reasonable person would construe that the book was written solely for the purpose of communicating information designed to achieve a breakdown. I don't have any idea what that means. I also wonder what they exactly mean by a reasonable person, and how could they determine that the book was written solely for the purpose of communicating information designed to achieve a breakdown. I don't know what kind of breakdown they're talking about either, but I think that's an interesting choice that it's not just an interesting choice of a book to ban, but it's an interesting choice of how to word the reason behind it. They also banned Blood in the Water and Visiting Day, which was written by Jacqueline Woodson. They didn't give a reason for banning that one. They banned Chokehold and Lovely Bones. Lovely Bones was a very popular book. I'm not sure. The reason given was that it was sexually explicit and offensive. Offensive to whom? They banned Her Body and Other Parties. Here again, it contains what they said was inappropriate sexual behaviors, and it constitutes a threat to the security. So these would be interesting to read. I think banned books are probably bestsellers, whether they were before or not, just because people want to see why it's been banned. They also banned I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, and the reason was the sexual content. So apparently there's a lot of fear of sexuality. They also banned, interestingly, Anne Frank, The Diary of Anne Frank, because they didn't give a reason, but it looks to me like the reason was they didn't want people in prison reading about a young girl. They also banned Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. So that, here again, it's about sexuality, gender. So it seems to me that a lot of books that have been banned on this list, and probably on some other different lists, are banned because of fear. Fear of either the message that the book is bringing, fear of new ideas in general, fear of an uprising, fear of the authorities losing power, or the fear of being wrong. So I think we have to question whether or not those fears are reason enough to ban this kind of literature.
The last week of September is annual National Banned Book Week, intended to unite authors, journalists, publishers, booksellers, librarians, and teachers in a celebration of reading and sharing ideas, even unpopular or unorthodox ideas, because we believe, that we all have the ability to think for ourselves. Every year, the American Library Association posts a list of the 10 books most frequently targeted for censorship, the books most frequently banned across the nation in the preceding 12 months, joining the ranks of classics like A Brave New World, Of Mice and Men, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Catcher in the Rye. The list for 2020 will be released tomorrow, so I wanted to share with you today the list from 2019. Last year, there were 566 books targeted, and these are the 10 most commonly under attack. George by Alex Jenreasons. Beyond Magenta, Transgender Teens Speak Out by Susan Kuklin. A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo by Jill Twiss. Sex is a Funny Word by Corey Silverberg. Prince and Night, illustrated by Stevie Lewis. I Am Jazz by Jessica Herthel and Jazz Jennings, illustrated by Sheila McNichols. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Drama, written and illustrated by Raina Telgemeier. The entire Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. And finally, And Tango Makes Three by Peter Parnell and Justin Richardson, illustrated by Henry Cole. Of the 10 in that list, 8 of them were targeted for their positive portrayal of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender folks. Transgender folks, not surprisingly, were the most targeted by book bans. The other 2 titles are amazingly mainstream: The Handmaid's Tale and the Harry Potter series.
Rev Denis asked me to say a few words about atonement, because these are the days of awe as celebrated in the Jewish community. September is a time for us to start to turn inward and think about really confessing things that we've done wrong, people that we've harmed, things that we regret, and taking a close look at those things and confessing either to ourselves or to others the wrongfulness that we have experienced and the harm that it may have caused. A number of years ago, Rabbi Denkar from Cleveland wrote an interesting article called "We Could All Use Our Own True Days of Awe." And in December of 2019, I gave a sermon on that topic using his reading from The Plain Dealer as the springing point for that sermon. So I'm not going to rehash that sermon, but I think the article is still certainly quite interesting. He talks about this turning inward. We don't really have confession in our tradition like the Catholics do, or as the Jewish community does. But we certainly should do something equivalent to that by looking inward and recognizing the wrongdoing that we may have done in our lifetimes and the people that we may have hurt as a consequence. So that's the first step, looking inward and kind of making that confession. The second step is repentance. Repentance, according to Rabbi Denkar, has to involve restitution of some kind in order to be meaningful and in order to be capable of bringing us to the atonement or at-one-ment with the state of the universe or with our relationship with others. So he thinks that the repentance part of it, including restitution to make up for our wrongs, is extremely important. He talks about that turning, the idea of turning away from the sin or away from the harmful behavior and turning toward a repentance and a restitution that will, as he puts it, repair the fabric of the universe. I kind of like that way of thinking of it, that something is out of sync if you have not done something more than simply confessing the wrongdoing. You have to somehow repair the fabric of the universe. So he said you have to take those steps and figure out what will achieve atonement or at-one-ment in that situation. So as we go through this month of September and early October, we should be thinking about these days of awe. And awe is not used in the way we often use it in modern days. He defines awe as an introspective examination of our deeds and an honest process of self-evaluation and change. He says that awesome is more than how we're using it. It doesn't mean cool or really wonderful. It really means that introspective examination. So while we go through the days of awe this year, let's all think about maybe people we've hurt or things we've done that we regret, and not only confess those wrongdoings to ourselves or to others, but also let's look for ways to repair the fabric of the universe.
Nazi Germany banned and often burned over 4,000 books and hundreds of authors. It's hard to say exactly how many because there were no fewer than 40 government agencies that got into the act. Those described as damaged and undesirable and un-German included thinkers like Bertolt Brecht, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Andre Gide, Ernest Hemingway, Jack London, Karl Marx, Marcel Proust, H.G. Wells, and Oscar Wilde, as well as scientists like Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, and Magnus Hirschfeld. It may seem like the workings of a long-dead dictatorship of a bygone era, but book burning, book banning happens here and now, as evidenced by the annual observation of Banned Book Week. In 1982, the Supreme Court heard the case of Island Tree School District versus Pico and ruled that school officials can't ban books from libraries based solely on content. Shortly thereafter, Banned Books Week was launched at the American Booksellers Association Book Expo in Anaheim, California. American Libraries magazine at the time described the scene. At the entrance to the convention center loomed huge metal cages, padlocked and chained, with 500 books piled up inside them, with a massive sign above reading, "Caution. Some people consider these books dangerous." The effort was a huge success and was the spark for Banned Books Week, a coalition that includes major media outlets like PBS and the New York Times. And every year, the list of books targeted for censorship includes surprises to most readers. Some of them are wildly popular. You know, I sometimes feel like the only person in the world who hasn't read the Harry Potter books. Yet, the American Library Association says that they were banned and forbidden from discussion for referring to magic and witchcraft, for containing actual curses and spells, and for characters that use nefarious means to attain goals. Now, I have read The Handmaid's Tale, which was banned for vulgarity, profanity, and sexual overtones. What? Compared to other unchallenged books out there, it's pretty tame in those departments. When it was first published in 1985, it seemed to me to be a little far-fetched. The idea that our nation could be taken over by religious fundamentalists who blamed feminism and queer liberation for all of its troubles, right down to environmental degradation. But now that liberalism is blamed for everything from hurricanes and flooding to wildfires, and women's right to control their own bodies are under serious threat as the religious right controls so many legislatures and courts across the country, it seems much more plausible that we could turn into a despotic theocracy. It's interesting to me that The Handmaid's Tale, which seemed kind of forgotten until Netflix produced a series based on the novel starting 4 years ago, and women started showing up at demonstrations wearing the distinctive red outfits of the handmaids, it's suddenly under attack for being vulgar. Amazon.com, the largest bookseller in the world, banned many Nazi books back in March of this year, just as the world was shutting down in response to COVID-19. Of the various editions of Hitler's Mein Kampf previously available on paper and in e-readers, there were thousands of favorable reviews of its contents and message, including many giving it 5 stars. The cheaper Kindle editions even had links, this is incredible, to author biographies and offers for updates and links to books with similar subject matter. It all seemed to be encouraging anti-Semitism, even giving a home, a forum to its proponents. So, not surprisingly, all the leading Holocaust education and Jewish groups lobbied for removal of this material from Amazon's website. After years of pressure, Amazon finally removed Nazi propaganda books, including books designed to teach anti-Semitism to children, like Julia Streicher's The Poisonous Mushroom. There are still editions of Mein Kampf available on Amazon, but they include introductions that contextualize it. In one, Abraham Foxman, a former national director of the Anti-Defamation League, wrote, "We dismissed him as a madman, and we ignored his wretched book. The result was a tragedy of unprecedented proportions. This is yet another lesson to take from Mein Kampf, the lesson of vigilance and responsibility, of not closing our eyes to the evil around us." Proceeds from the sale of Mein Kampf benefit Jewish organizations. Of course, Amazon isn't the only online organization to be tasked with censorship. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and other social media sites have been under attack for more than 4 years now for not stopping misinformation and for, in some cases, tolerating bald-faced lies designed to increase the hatred and divisiveness that have been getting worse in the last couple decades. Now, I'm not saying that social media sites shouldn't take responsibility for their content, especially content that foments hatred or spreads disinformation that undermines democracy. But it all makes me wonder, along with Mary, who decides what's real or helpful and what is fake or destructive? Especially when there is so much we can't agree on, so much that is so basic, so elemental. One thing I know is that most of us, in the midst of chaos, are driven by fear. Masks are a great example. On the one hand, there are many of us afraid of spreading the virus to our neighbors and family. And on the other hand, there are many who are afraid of government infringing on our lives. Some are afraid of both. All of us are afraid of not having any control. When I first started hearing about COVID-19 back at the beginning of the year, I was afraid. Like many, I felt confident that if I were to contract the virus, I would survive the illness. But the last thing I wanted was to pass it along to anyone at greater risk than I. So I did everything recommended, even as the information we received from infectious disease experts changed. I started off by washing my hands constantly, avoiding physical contact with folks, and keeping my distance. I disinfected everything that came into the house, including mail and even fresh produce. When the media started reporting that experts were encouraging masks for the protection of others, I got one and started using it properly. Sure, there was conflicting information, and much of it seemed politically motivated. But deciding whom to believe, for me, was pretty easy. I listened to the people who could admit that they didn't know everything and acknowledged that what they know about this novel coronavirus is evolving. It's a novel virus, after all. I listened to the folks who said, look, we got it wrong at first. We're genuinely sorry. And we're learning as we get more information and do more research. This is what we know now. Our goal is to keep everyone safe. The people whose information I have not trusted are the people who claim to know everything, even when it's obvious they're making it up as they go along. The people I have not trusted are the ones who share information that benefits them without much regard for the health and safety of others. The people I have not trusted hold unchanging views, no matter how much the evidence to the contrary evolves. These are the people who seem more interested in being right, the people who seem to lack a capacity for compassion or even introspection. And these are the people who are at risk of being censored by journalists and local media sites. I have to say, I'm not particularly worried about that kind of censorship. Spreading self-serving disinformation that does physical, measurable harm to the public while intensifying partisan discord should be stopped, in my opinion. Even though censorship always feels like a slippery slope to me. But maybe if we all had a bit more of the spirit of Yom Kippur about us, it could get better. Maybe if we all took the time for self-reflection in order to recognize the harm we do to others and confess when we are wrong, then work to figure out how to make it right, we wouldn't have to be so worried about silencing each other. Maybe if we spent more time seeking atonement at 1 mint and less time saving face in order to preserve our own power, we wouldn't have to resort to the modern day version of book banning, deleting social media posts. In these days of awe, no matter our own personal philosophies, may we each take the time to look inside ourselves, to understand our motivations, to change our habits, to seek restitution, no matter how great or small our transgressions. May we turn toward one another, for in isolation, there is no life. We may be physically separated, but we are not isolated. In turning toward one another, may we turn from callousness to sensitivity, from hostility to love, from pettiness to purpose, from envy to contentment, from carelessness to discipline, from fear to faith. May it be so. There's a lot to be afraid of these days. So much seems out of our control, and a lot of times it feels like it's only going to get worse. But you know the one place for me where faith consistently reigns over fear? Here, at East Shore, among you. I have faith in you. I know how much this community means to you, how much you are willing to work to keep it not just alive, but vibrant. And most importantly, adaptable. So I want to remind you to send in your pledge fulfillment check as soon as you can. And if you're new to us, joining us online without ever having become a member, visiting our sanctuary, or even meeting any of us in person, I want to encourage you also to give what you can to help sustain our mission to love, revere, discover, and connect. Thank you, and thanks for joining us today.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow. Giving, receiving, as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor, both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care. May your life be as a song, resounding with the dawn, to sing awake the light, and softly serenade the stars, ever dancing circles in the night. May your life be as a song, resounding with the dawn, to sing awake the light, and softly serenade the stars, ever dancing circles in the night. May your life be as a song, resounding with the dawn, to sing awake the light, and softly serenade the stars, ever dancing circles in the night. Ever dancing circles in the night.
Let's close now the way we did last week, with the words of the Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, because they feel as appropriate to the message today as they did last week. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve, that in fair weather or in foul, in good times or in tempests, I may not forget that to which my life is committed. Keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve.
We join hands in Unitarian Universalist fellowship, pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom
which transcends all creeds, not to think alike, but to journey together.